Just okay.
Now we're
Okay.
good?
Now we're recording. Now I'm all out of sync here. Okay, hold
Okay,
on. Let's see.
well,
Let's
I'll
do
repeat
that. Let's
that.
do that. Okay. Now we're recording. A funny start. Yeah, you're right. It's a Sunday.
Yep.
FS triathlete.
And every now and then we've got to switch the times because of events and things like that. So this week, I did my annual ride to Death Valley from Las Vegas, and that was on Friday.
That's awesome.
And it's such a spectacular ride. I mean, if you get the opportunity, or if anyone else gets the opportunity to do it, where someone will meet you in Furnace Creek
Hmm.
and drive you home, or so we stay down in Amagrosa, which is pretty close to there, and then we drive home the next day.
Yeah.
But it's an all day affair. I left my house at 8:30 and got to Death Valley at 4:30,
Hmm.
with a pretty sizable lunch stop in Pahrump. We stop at Sonic, and Sonic is good when you're on your bike because you can order and be outside, and
Yeah.
you don't have to leave your bike. You don't have to bring your bike inside.
Yeah.
And then we stop at Death Valley Junction for another sizable break. And the best part about the whole ride is the last 20 miles is all downhill. You
Yeah.
literally do not have to pedal
I love
the
that.
last 20
Tailwind
miles.
downhill. That's awesome.
Yeah. And the pavement is perfect. Like the
Is it?
last 20 miles it was new, mostly new about a year and a half ago. And I was really
Hmm.
worried because they had all that flooding. Um,
Mm.
but only like little sections of the edge of the road were flooded out on that one.
Okay.
So yeah, you literally could do the last 20 miles of, you would not have to pedal at all. I think
Oh, nice.
I was pretty tired by then. I averaged 120 watts for the
Yeah.
last
Yeah.
20 miles.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're still going like 25 to 30
Yeah.
miles an hour for
Yeah.
the whole descent, because you end up, below sea level.
That's great.
And the peak right before the last bit is 3,000 feet. So you basically descend 3,000 feet
Mm.
in 20 miles. But yeah, it's a really good ride. And I know not a lot of people think of like to do something like that where you go for such a long distance. Well, for my house is 122 miles.
Yeah. That's great.
But once again, the whole point is not to do it as fast as you can.
That's right.
Actually,
That's
it's
right.
to enjoy the day. and
Yeah.
and honestly, the snow-capped mountains when you're on the backside of Mount
Mm.
Charleston and looking back, the snow is spectacular. Even going into Death Valley, I don't know if you're familiar, but Telescope Peak is like the highest mountain in Death Valley,
Okay.
11,000 feet, and the snow on it was spectacular.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So, I mean, I highly recommend people do it. The roads in general are really good the entire way. The only time
Hmm.
roads are bad are actually in Pahrump.
Yeah.
But once you're out of Pahrump, the roads are good again. And
Mm.
so, yeah, I'm making my recommendation
Oh, I
for
love it.
that.
And it's so important to do these events that are just they're for fun
Oh
and
yeah,
for great training at the same time. I mean, takes me back to, our epic October
right.
that we did, which was really great. And a lot of people did a lot of different things, and they were all epic, and they weren't event related in terms of a competition. And that's so important to just do things that we enjoy. And we build up this fitness. It's great to do training rides and what have you, but at the same time, it's good just to go out and enjoy a ride like that. Okay, I'm gonna put that on my list of things to do.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is I was out riding when I was in riding it. I was like, this is more fun to me, and I
Hmm.
look forward to this more than Oceanside. And
Yeah,
Oceanside's
yeah,
in 2 weeks,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
This
Right.
big race, 70.3. I look forward to this ride more than that
Yeah,
race.
that's great.
It costs next to nothing, right?
Yeah,
There's
right.
no entry fee,
Yeah,
right?
right, right.
There's the stress is so much less. Like
Yeah,
it's just an enjoyable thing. Like the
yeah,
stress is make
yeah,
sure your bike is clean, make sure you got all your food.
yeah.
Like in my wife,
Logistics, you still got to work through it, but that's okay. I mean, that's part of the
but
fun of all our events anyhow, is doing the logistics.
but
So,
there's no but even if something goes wrong, it's no big deal,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Like if I don't have enough food, well, you could stop in Prump and
yeah.
there's a Walmart and you can bring it. We brought
Hmm.
our bikes into Walmart before, and you grab a few bananas and you're on your way.
It's,
And I agree with you. Like the less like doing things like this where you can still work, like it's still a challenge. Like don't get me wrong, like going into it, my fitness is not great right now. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
for me.
right.
And I was like, man, this is gonna be a challenge today. Like
Hmm.
I left my house, I'm like, this is gonna be a challenge. And
Yeah,
you hit 20 miles and I'm in, just at the turn at Blue Diamond there. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I have 102 miles to go.
yeah, right, right, right. It's
Like,
overwhelming sometimes thinking about it, but that's what's amazing.
yep.
And a lot of people, no matter if you're doing a sprint, an Olympic, a half, or a full, I mean, people sometimes underestimate the fitness that they have to be able to go out and do these types of things. Even a sprint race, that you can't underestimate doing that.
Well, it was funny because I was talking. My friend Julie did the whole ride with me, and we were talking yesterday. And I'm like, Julie, like, congratulations on doing this. And she was kind of taken back. I'm like, there's not that many people that can do this.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
can go out and ride 122 miles
Yeah.
and 6,000 feet of climbing. Like there's just it's a very rarefied thing that we have this fitness
hmm
to be able to do this, and we should take advantage of it and
Yeah.
do fun stuff. So I'm going to ask people in the comments, or if people are watching here, or if they're not even watching live, if they've got some cool stuff around here that they've done that they'd
Yeah.
recommend, because that's my one cool thing that I really like
Yeah.
to do. But I'd be up for other ones. I know, we talked before about going to Laughlin and then
Yeah.
riding to Laughlin, stay the night, and then riding back the next day.
Yeah.
That to me sounds great. I've often thought of doing a ride from Palm Springs to Las Vegas,
Yeah.
mostly because we get a lot of south winds, and I think that
Mhm.
that would be pretty cool. So
Well,
yeah,
one of my there are a couple of local fun rides on this side of town is Hoover Dam.
yeah,
That's a ride that's great to do. It's
yeah,
very touristy,
very
but
fun
you
to
feel
do.
like a tourist. You take pictures and you still get there and you're like, oh, this is so cool. And then the other is Nelson's Landing, which is really sort of a neat tucked away area to bike to, and it's got that funky little rest stop, if you will, down there on Nelson's Landing, and it's some good climbing too.
So
So,
and I've never went all the way down to Nelson's Landing.
oh, okay.
I did it once, and we went like maybe half the way down,
Mm,
and the people were like, that's enough, because we're gonna
yeah,
have to come back out of here.
because you got to
And
get
so
back up.
when you're with a group of people, you do with
Yeah,
what they want. And so we
yeah,
turned around and came back. I'm like, man, I need to go do that again. And then every
yeah,
time I think of doing it, it's the middle of summer, and I don't want to do it
yeah.
in
Right,
summer.
right.
So
You gotta carry your fluid. You're right.
yep.
So on our side of town, we got the group out and we did a polar bear plunge down at the lake. And
Yes.
it was a polar bear plunge. It was cold. I didn't go in. I
You're
provided
the
support on the
you're the
paddleboard.
smart one there.
So it was, but I did take my thermometer down, my digital thermometer, put the probe in and monitor the water temp. And the lowest I saw was 57.6 Fahrenheit. And it bounced around between there and really 58. So it was cold. Anything under 60 degrees is cold. And you got
Yep.
to really have some strategies for dealing with that. And anything under 60, I always wear a neoprene cap for one. Some people like to wear booties. Sometimes you can even wear gloves depending on the temperature. But it is important to get used to that. If you look at your race, and the race is typically a cold water swim, you got to do some prep for it. And we have not only this time of year with the lake being cold, but down at Willow Beach on the Colorado River side of the dam, downstream from the dam, that water is almost always below 60.
Even
Uh,
in the height of summer, right?
that's right. That's right. So you can always go down and get some cold water exposure on that side. It's a little bit of a drive, but it is available. Well, we had a group of, I don't know where we were around 10 people, and had some good swims, and then jumped on the bike and did some biking afterwards.
That's awesome. And then we get some events coming up this week for the Tri Club and for listeners of our program. Even if you're out of town, we're going to do a Zwift ride tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's through the Tri Club on Zwift, 6:30, 1 hour. We're going to, once again, social. Be ready if you know how to use the companion app. We'll do some chatting
hmm
as we go. I picked a course this time that's relatively flat, so that'll make for maybe able to keep our group together a little bit better than
Yeah.
the last time we did it. So please feel free to join us on that. And then next Sunday we've got a ride out at Corn Creek
Yep.
that we're going to do. And if you haven't been out to Corn Creek and you're a triathlete in Las Vegas, you need to get out there.
Yep.
It is such a good place to practice your aero position with very, very little traffic, and a good place to basically self-support a ride. So
Yep.
I encourage people to do that.
Yep. And they did put some speed bumps in for the
Yeah,
cars. So
yeah, which is even better for us because
yeah, that's right.
they're not in the bike lane,
No, no.
but it should keep people. The truth of the matter is, one time I was out there, I think I rode 120 miles back and forth, and I think I saw 10 cars the whole
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
So it's
great.
not really, and then they can see you from so far away. There's
Mm-hmm.
no like blind corners or anything like that. Um, yeah, so if you get a chance, come on out with us next Sunday. If you can't make it Sunday, Corn Creek Ride. If you don't know where it is, it's out on 95, just past the Paiute Golf Course.
Yeah, one of the few flat rides in
Well, it's
Vegas.
not even that flat, really. It's I
No,
mean,
it's a little rolly. Yeah.
but you can be in the time trial position for most of it. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so tonight we're going to talk about running metrics. And I was really fortunate this week that I was invited to speak for the American Physical Therapy Association, the Nevada branch, for their monthly educational meeting on this topic. And so I'm kind of well versed in it right now. And actually, my talk was on looking at load management and running metrics and cycling metrics and how those things kind of go hand in hand. So yeah, tonight we'll talk about running metrics. It's kind of fun because we have a lot of running metrics that we have available to us, but a lot of triathletes don't either use them or don't know how to use them.
Mm-hmm.
And so first question I have for you, John, you're a biomechanist, and this stuff, like as far as like ground contact time and vertical oscillation and cadence, I mean, this is your wheelhouse,
Yeah.
right? As far as what you've done research in and what you teach, correct?
Yep.
So then the question is, do you use these things to help your training? I don't know the answer, but I'm thinking I know the answer.
Well, I bet you can guess, but yes, this is what we research. This is what I've been researching now since the really early '90s, and looking at running and trying to understand factors that influence running. And so we've been doing work with accelerometers, which is in essence a lot of devices people are using now, really since the mid '90s, on trying to quantify gait, looking at all sorts of things: stride length, stride frequency, velocity, influence of surface. We put people in all different types of running situations, from running in the water to running on different surfaces, running over ground, running on a treadmill, running forward, running backwards, all this type of. And each time we introduce what we would refer to as a perturbation or change in something, we look for changes in gait. And then by looking for those changes in gait and understanding them, we try to understand gait itself a lot. So I've done a lot of kinematics, a lot of kinetic type of work with running. But at the end of the day, I wear my watch, I wear my heart rate monitor that does the run metrics as well. But when I just go for a run, I totally run by feel.
Yeah. So then the question I have to ask is, in your experience in the research that you've done, and this is going to be and I think it's going to be a controversial question. So I hate to preface it, but I'm going to make it say I think it's controversial. Is optimizing your running mechanics something that you can do to become a better runner, or do better runners just happen to have better mechanics and metrics?
Yeah, that's the holy grail right there. That's a question that we really try to understand, and there's a lot that goes into an answer to that. But uh, you, it's not always clear what is an optimal gait.
Right.
It's
Agreed.
not always clear. And what we do know, that if we take someone who's running a particular way and then we change the way they run, almost always it's going to be a worse situation. That
Yeah.
means it's going to use more oxygen, or it's going to cause more impact. But over time, they may be able to learn how to use that gait a little better and may actually be a little bit more optimal. So there's no answer to your question at this point in terms of what is an optimal gait. And frankly, if you look at the world class marathoners, the people who are the top 10, they each have their unique characteristics that are specific to them. And none of us should probably try to emulate those running styles, because
Agreed.
our morphology, our experience in running is different than theirs. And so we really need to look at this optimization from an N of one situation. My gait is probably going to be very different because the way I'm built and the way that my experience of running and the way I move versus your gait. That's just the N of one part. And so the problem with a lot of our research is we do what we call group statistics. We take a group of 10 people and then we average those characteristics down to one average response. and that average response may not actually represent the group in total because they're the differences in gait. So I'm sort of getting around your question. There's no answer to it, but I do think that people can try to learn a gait that's optimal for them. And I think we'll get to this point by doing lots of different things and let the brain figure out the
Yep.
movements that are most effective for them at whatever pace they want to run.
Okay. Awesome.
Sorry, long answer.
No, because that's the and the truth of the matter is, when I was talking to this group of physical therapists, what I told them was, you can use these things to help potentially your patients that are injured if these things are way out of whack. Right. So, for example, if someone's running at a cadence of 155, and we'll get into cadence,
Right.
we know that that is well outside of the normal distribution.
Yep. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Or they have a really long ground contact time, or they have a really high vertical oscillation. Right. We can use those as outliers that can help you if you're trying to, what I was expressing to them, if you're trying to figure out why someone's injured or how to treat an injury, and let's say they have, I don't know, a calf strain. What the old way of looking at a calf strain was, okay, let's treat your calf, right? We'll do strengthening of your calf. We'll do some modalities on your calf. Maybe we'll do, I don't know, like electric stim and laser and all of these things, and we'll strengthen you. And then the next generation was kind of, okay, well, let's look above and below. So what's happening in your foot? What's happening in your knee and your hip? Oh, okay, well, something's wrong with your foot. You don't have enough motion in your foot, and that's why you have this issue. So that's kind of next level. And then the next level is looking, to me, it's looking at these things, right? It's actually looking at the thing that you're doing in concert with those other things. And utilizing this last piece of the puzzle. And then if you take it even one step further, and something we talked about with Ron Gallagher was, that most of these overuse injuries are load management issues. Well, load management's a lot easier if you have very good metrics. Right. Load management's easier if your ankle's working properly or your hips are working properly. You have good balance and good strength and good range of motion. And so these are all like intricate pieces of these puzzles. And that's the way I like to look at it. And so if we start to talk about these things, understanding, like you said, that this is a chicken or egg situation. But if you're trying to become a better runner or a more robust runner, or if you're injured and you're trying to figure out why you're injured, maybe looking at these things and having a basic understanding of them is relevant. And it's data we're collecting. A lot of us are collecting already. And it's data that's available while you're running on your running watch. And if you're an outlier in this stuff, and we'll give you some examples tonight of some numbers and things that maybe that are, within 1.5 to 2 standard deviations of normal, that we could look at. Does that sound good?
Oh yeah, no, I love it. And just to add to that a bit, is that you're spot on with talking about it that way with the injury and preventing an injury. Is that what we do know helps shorten that time period to try to figure out a problem, because our algorithm to try to go through what could be going on has become more and more sophisticated, and I think it's going to get even more sophisticated with this AI that's really coming on board. But it's such a challenge to take what we do know and try to be predictive in terms of preventing injuries. It's very difficult, but but that's where we're going, and that's where I think a lot of this wearable tech and a lot of the AI will actually help us sort of pinpoint things that we're doing that could cause an injury. And this is sort of the paradox that we operate in too, is that we have this idea that running or exercise in general can lead to overuse injuries. But at the same time, we know that exercise and running builds up a protective nature of preventing injuries. And so the trick is really trying to find this balance between how much running or exercise is protective and how much running ultimately leads to an injury. So we got to find that sort of middle ground of being in that world.
Well, and that's, that takes us back to the load management stuff, right?
Mhm.
And we've talked a lot about load management. But it's why it's so difficult, and why load management is so difficult is because if it was just load management, we could use, once again, and I think you're right, we're going to get to an AI answer to this, but we could use very simple metrics. Okay, well, you're only going to increase, and we talked about the 10%. You're only going to increase 10% per week,
Yeah.
right? But people still get hurt doing that.
Hmm.
And people can be overtrained by doing that, or they could be undertrained by doing that, depending on the underlying the chassis, right?
Hmm.
So, like you're saying, you build up a more robust chassis. Some people build it up quicker, some people build it up slower. Some people, once again, are going to have strength deficits. They're going to have imbalances in mobility, and then once again, we layer on top of it the mechanics of running, and it's a difficult. I mean, this is difficult stuff, and for example, the people that I coach, I look at their metrics if they have it.
Yeah.
Or not everyone collects this stuff. I
Mhm.
encourage them to have the chest strap that does it, but not all of them do it. But those that do it, I look at it,
Mhm.
and but once again, if nothing's wrong and everything's going fine, and unless they're a big outlier, we don't make a change. But if they're saying, if I have someone, for example, that is running 10-minute miles, and they're like,
Mhm.
I want to run faster, and we've
Mhm.
done the load management properly, we've increased the activities that can make you run faster. Like you were doing some sprints, we're doing some different things, and they're not getting there, then I'm going to look to this kind of stuff. Does that does that make
Yeah.
sense?
No, I love it. And because in part you were speaking to finding those marginal gains,
Yep.
and that you're looking for, yeah, 10% is, when we're talking about 10%, that's the old rule of 10% every week, in terms of no more than 10% change in run mileage. But really, you're looking for that marginal gain that you can see with whatever change in exercise that you're going to have. And one more thing, because I know we've got some listeners that do a really good job of going back and looking through some of the literature on this. And so I'll just mention one more problem in the literature, and just something to think about as we're reading some papers in this area, is that if we take someone and we put them in a 12-week run program, and we know that they're not injured in the beginning of that program, and then at the end maybe they return to the lab for whatever reason, for whatever post test you're doing, and you indicate whether or not they were injured, and then they're either injured or not injured. The problem ends up in the literature is that where they got injured in that training program could be really meaningful. And this is what you were just speaking to, is if someone gets injured in the first 3 weeks, that could be very different than someone who's getting injured in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But yet they would both present as being injured during that 12-week period. A very different type of mechanism. And you're talking about building up the chassis. I mean, it may be very different things that each of these people need to do to prevent injury in the future. So it's just one more
Yeah.
complicated. I mean, that's what we do in research. We make things more complicated. So
Yeah. So let's get into this stuff, and let's talk about what some of these advanced metrics are. So tonight I'd like to talk about ground contact time, vertical oscillation, and cadence. And if we can, we'll get in maybe running power. And we'll just, and I know, and I've done a little bit with running power. I don't know if you have
mhm.
done a little bit with that, but it's a pretty advanced thing. And I don't think a lot of people are using it yet, or if they're using
No.
it, they might not be using it properly. We can maybe touch on that, but I think we'll spend a lot of time talking about the other three things. So let's start out, if it's okay with you, with ground contact time.
Okay.
So can you explain to us
Oh, sure. Yeah.
what ground contact time is?
All right, so we have our running stride, which consists of, I'll start with the right foot striking the ground, and then propelling yourself into the air. The left foot strikes the ground, propelling yourself into the air, and then the right foot strikes the ground again. That sequence of events is called a stride. So right side to right side, or you could do left side to left side. Technically, we say it's any discrete event on one side to the next same discrete event on the other side. So a discrete event is just something that happens in a short period of time. Sometimes we use heel strike or ground contact. Sometimes we use toe off, what have you. But in that stride, the right foot, in this example, the way I'm describing it, the right foot is in contact with the ground for a specific part of that stride. And that time that the foot strikes the ground to the time that the foot leaves the ground, is toe off, that time ends up being what we just call ground contact time. And it ends up being about a quarter of a second.
So it's the time that the foot is in contact with the
I
ground.
know,
I mean,
biomechanists are not
it's
very,
it's such a
creative.
good, but there's some things in biomechanics that have really weird things.
Yeah,
They're like,
yeah,
well, I don't get that.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
but
Freud.
ground contact time to me is one of the easier
Yeah,
ones, right?
yeah,
So, and you said it's about a quarter of a second.
yeah.
And it's an interesting one. When I was doing some reading for my presentation, I was actually seeing that really when you get above 300 microseconds, so
Mhm.
0.3 of a second
Yep.
and above, it can become quite problematic.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah.
and then if you get really low, so I think it was 180.
Yeah, that's sprinting.
Yeah, but if you're running like jogging and
Yeah.
you're that short, that can also become problematic.
Yep.
And a lot of these metrics are like that. It's not this, hey, we want to have the lowest ground contact time or the
Right.
highest cadence. Like there's a range that we need to be looking for. So that being said, you mentioned quarter of a second. And once again, when I did my reading on this, it was basically saying, look, listen, like a quarter of a second or 250 milliseconds
Yeah.
is kind of in the middle.
Right.
And the more elite runners are right around 200 microseconds, but they're also running a lot faster,
Yep.
right?
So spot on. Ground contact time is very related to how fast you're running. It's also
Yep.
related to stride frequency. So yeah, when you mentioned 0.8, I mean, right away, that's sprinting. That's, the fast. And the issue with short ground contact time is you've got to push on the ground quite a bit to get your foot off the ground and get your body back propelled into the air. And so that's one of the problematic issues. And when your ground contact time is so long, that means that you're really stressing the muscles over a long period of time within the gait cycle.
Yep.
And you're right. I mean, a lot of when we use the term optimization, you mentioned that earlier. What we're looking for is a parameter that's neither maximum nor minimum. It's
Right.
something in between those, and so it's optimal. What we don't know where that optimal value actually ends up being. So yeah, great point.
But I get it. And once again, like thinking in a practical manner, like I've had athletes that I've worked with that are 280. So
Mm-hmm.
280 microseconds, and they want to run faster. And that's when they're running like a decent pace and they're still on the ground for a long time. Then I might say, hey, let's try for a couple of weeks let's see if we can lower this down to 250.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see what happens. And you're
Yeah.
right. At first, it's less efficient. They're going to have a higher heart rate
Yeah.
because, well, they're going to have a higher cadence, which tends to lead to a little bit higher heart rate. But it's amazing that in a few of the athletes I've worked with, it actually really helps.
Yeah.
And they become faster and they become more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the only metric that they changed.
Mm-hmm.
And, and the cool thing with this one, once again, you can look at it on your watch, just like your pace. You can set up your watch to give you a ground contact time for the last amount of time you want, for like the last minute, the last lap, whatever you want. And you can get feedback, just like you can get feedback on anything else on your watch, or you can just look at the end, right?
Mm-hmm.
Today I'm focusing on this. And, last week I ran 8-minute miles and my ground contact time was 280. This week I ran 8-minute miles and my ground contact time was 260. And then you can look at other metrics and see, did it help me, basically? And once again, these are like a lot of it's trial and error. It's do it for a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks, and it'll be the same with all these metrics we talk about. But I think it's one that I think is underutilized. People love to look at, how fast am I running?
Great.
What's my heart rate?
Yeah.
Right. And those are good things, but we have other things that we can utilize as well. That being said, there are some exercises that we can do that aren't just running that can help improve ground contact time. And these tend to be plyometric type exercises. And I know we haven't talked too much about plyometric exercise, so I'm just going to give people a few that one that I do often is jump rope. And I jump rope to actually get better ground contact time. And I jump rope usually twice a week. I'm building up. I think I did 18 minutes jumping rope today. So it's it was pretty good for me today. That's one. And then box jumps, like little, like, and I'm saying I have my little plow box. It's actually
Yeah,
back here.
that's
It's
good.
12 inches. It's a small one. But I do box jumps, and once again, I'm just trying to, and I'm trying to move fast as I do the box jumps, in particular, getting off the ground fast.
Hmm.
So those are a few things that you could do that outside of this to potentially help that.
I love it. Now, on your ground contact time changing, I think
Mhm.
that's a great thing to consciously try to do, because I think anytime we can consciously try to change gait, we will eventually come back to that gait that ultimately is good for us. And so we've done a lot of work where um, there's a couple of different ways to do it. One is you keep your speed exactly the same
Yeah,
and you change your ground contact time. We would do that experimentally by changing stride frequency, and that would end up changing ground contact time at the same time.
yeah,
Or the other way to do it is to let ground contact time change, but then change velocity. And
right.
so you can actually run a different speed and use different ground contact times. So this is great to even run downhill or even run uphill. You'll actually end up changing your ground contact time as well. I
Yeah.
love the plyometric part. In fact, I'll even throw out a unique one that people probably have not done before. Maybe as kids you did, but plyometrics in shallow water.
Yeah. Oh, it's great.
Yeah, and one thing, and we've been looking at this, we've been looking at how active muscles are while doing plyometrics in shallow water. And in essence, the muscle activity is spot on the same that what we've seen so far than when you're doing it on land, which is great because you're stressing those muscles and the elastic tissue as well. It's also great because you're also reducing the impact with the ground. And so you can train the muscles, but take away some of that impact.
I'm so glad you said that, because every Saturday when we finish running or swimming, I
Yep,
usually finish a little earlier than the
yep,
rest of my group, and we have a 3 foot deep pool.
yep.
And I go back and forth 3 or 4 times, skipping,
That's
jumping,
perfect. Yeah.
and I'm doing, but I'm focusing on getting my feet off of the surface, right?
Hmm.
Um, there's something in plyometrics, and this gets, I mean, in the weeds a little bit, but it's called the amortization phase, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. But it's the time between when your foot basically decelerates to accelerates.
Yep.
It's the easiest way to think of it, and that's what we're trying to shorten. And underwater, you could do it just as quick,
Hmm.
right? But you're exactly right. You're putting less stress on the system,
Yep.
less stress on the joints, less stress on the ankle
Mhm.
joint, knee joint, hip joint, and potentially even less stress on the muscle. But the muscle, it's the timing, and it's down to between eccentric and concentric contractions
Mhm.
that we're doing it, and it's that timing. And you absolutely can do it underwater. Now, it's hard to get athletes that are not triathletes to do that, right? Because
Mhm.
getting a runner and saying, "Hey, we're going to bring you into shallow water, and you got to
Yeah.
get in a
Right.
bathing suit, and you got to do this," I can bother.
Yeah.
But if you're already swimming and it's a shallow
Mhm.
pool,
Yeah.
and you finish your session 2 or 3 times up and down the pool skipping. I'll even do like single leg hops.
Yep.
I think it could be very beneficial for you.
I'm a big advocate of water exercise in general, and so doing it forwards, doing it backwards, doing it sideways in
Sideways,
shallow
yeah.
water is such a great way, I think, to stay healthy. And then I'll even do it in my hot tub out back. So I'm in the hot tub. I'll say, oh, I'll just do 10 jumps, and but yeah,
Yeah,
I love doing it in my pool.
yeah.
It's a little too cold right now, but yeah, I
Yeah,
think
if you have a pool,
yep,
and even if your pool's a little bit deeper, you could do it on the steps,
yep, yep,
right? So I don't know about you, but I like about 3 feet deep. It's
yep.
kind of a good spot.
Hmm.
I think any shallower than that,
Yeah.
you can slip
You're
and
still getting some of the impact.
yeah,
That water is not slowing you down enough
yeah.
when you hit the bottom.
The
But
the one the one thing I'd say also is that for an older triathlete, doing plyometrics outside of the water is quite strenuous if you
yeah,
haven't,
you got to be careful.
and you got to be careful and take it slow into it. So, for some people that I advise, like for jumping rope, start with 5 minutes,
Mm,
and
mm-hmm.
and it might be broken, right?
Yeah,
Do a minute, take a break. Do a
yeah.
minute, take a break, and then build up. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I jump rope a lot. I can't do 10 minutes
Right.
straight because I always mess up. Like I can do
Mm-hmm.
10 minutes straight, but I stop over and over again because I keep hitting my
Mm-hmm.
touching the rope.
Yeah,
Um, but it takes a long time to build up to 10
yeah,
minutes
that's
basically,
right. And
straight.
that's that paradox is that
Yeah.
on one hand, plyometrics, I think, ultimately helps prevent injury, but on the other hand, it can also cause injury. So you got to find that
Yep.
sweet spot and really build it up. 10 jumps, try one, if you've never done it before, 10 jumps, call it good at that point and just,
Exactly.
build up from that.
Yep.
I think that's something that a lot of us do is we get going and all of a sudden it feels good. Oh, I'll do five more, I'll do 10 more, whatever.
Don't.
And you're going to quickly exceed the capacity of what your body is ready to handle. So,
Good. Okay, so the next one with ground contact time is that, and we didn't talk about this before, but it's actually ground contact balance.
oh,
So
between
this is
left and right. Yeah.
the left and right.
Yeah.
So, I've been struggling with hip injuries for a long time, and I had a lot of left hip problems, and I was almost better, then I go and run a half Ironman, and then my other hip starts to be a problem, and I end up looking back at my data,
Yeah.
and in the fall I was running at 55 40 45. So my right, which was the good leg, was taking on 55% of the load. My left was 45% because
Hmm.
the body is great at compensating,
Hmm.
right? And so then the next thing happens, I get a right hamstring strain
Hmm.
because I'm overcompensating
Yeah.
for the left side. So I think that utilizing that left right ground contact balance is important. And I know some people, they know about this maybe in cycling. You get a power meter on both sides, and you can see your power profile left, right. But
Hmm.
I think it's probably even more important in running when we start to add load relatively quickly. So, and I'll give you another example. If someone, for example, sprains their ankle,
Hmm.
they're a triathlete, they sprain their ankle, and they, oh, it's getting better, I'm almost there, and they start running long distances or a lot of load, and their ground contact balance is off. You can be really careful because you increase load to one side uh, um, more significantly than it's prepared for. And it was a mistake that I made, and so I like to share my mistakes. Is I didn't recognize that it was that far off,
Hmm.
and I should have done something about it.
Yeah.
So that's all I'm going to say.
Well, and this is the parameter that we're talking about. Not only in Garmin and Stride, they call it balance. In the research world, we talk about symmetry or asymmetry,
Right.
and we look at how similar the one side is to the other side. And on one hand, we think we always want it to be similar, but in reality, it's hardly ever exactly similar. Whatever's
Mhm.
happening on the left side doesn't is not a mirror image of the right side.
Yep.
But I think to your point in terms of injury and injury prevention, I think that's important to recognize because you do need to move a little bit differently at times. Otherwise, one side could be overcompensating for what's happening on the other side. And so this, I'm going to go right back to our water exercise. This is great, run sideways, switch to go the other sideways, and forward and backwards. Let the body sort of experience these other directions. And I think that ends up being a healthier symmetry or asymmetry even at that point.
So, have you ever lost a toenail running in a
Oh,
track?
yeah, a few times.
It'd be so really interesting stuff. Is if you could find your data and you had it, looking at your ground contact as that starts to happen, your ground
Hmm.
contact balance. And what happens is you start to put more weight on the other side.
Hmm.
And if you got 10 miles
Yeah,
more to
right.
go in your Ironman or half Ironman or whatever you got, you could significantly increase the load on one side.
Yeah,
And it has nothing to do with
yeah,
anything except for that toenail hurts.
that's right.
And you're going to do whatever it takes. Your body will do whatever it takes to reduce that pain.
Hmm.
But your mind knows, I got to go this fast. And
Yeah.
your watch is telling you, you need to run faster. Your heart rate's telling you, you need to run faster. So one of the things that I think is also important is being somewhat intuitive with this and
Hmm.
understanding, even if you're not looking at run metrics, if you have something that's causing you to change your mechanics, just be careful.
And on top of that, what is really important and what you just said is so incredibly important when something causes a change.
Yep.
So, and that could be internal, like what we're talking about, like a toenail or this or rock in your shoe or what have you, but it could also be external, the camber of the road,
Yep.
which way your road is leaning and is, are you always running on the road in one direction with the road being slanted in one direction? That's something to really pay attention to.
Yeah, and especially for us here, because we're actually really blessed that we have very little camber in our roads because we don't have a lot of rain.
Hmm.
I'm sure where you grew up in Buffalo and where I grew up in Canada,
Yeah.
the roads had a lot of
Oh
camber.
yeah, yeah. Even around here, you do need to look at. There's some routes that I won't ride or won't run on
Yeah,
because of the camber.
yeah,
It's too steep.
yeah.
We got to get caught up on a couple questions here. All right,
Okay.
Bob asked, based upon what you just mentioned about ground contact time, it seems that there would be an optimum balance between ground contact time and vertical oscillation.
It's literally the next thing we're going to talk about.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, then let's jump ahead. Let's go back. He's got another question. Would short ground contact time mean you launch higher in the air with each stride? Okay, let me tackle that one just a bit.
Well, let's talk about vertical oscillation and define it first, because I think if we don't define vertical oscillation, I don't think we can answer either of those questions.
Okay. All right. Go for it.
So basically, vertical oscillation is the bounce.
Hmm.
It's how high you get in the air on every step, and it's as simple as that. And and it's measured. Usually, we measure it in centimeters, at least in the lab, and on your Garmin watch, it's going to be measured in centimeters. But if you're running along and you look at it's really good to do it on a treadmill, actually, if you video yourself and you can see how much your head moves up and down, like up against bricks on a wall or something like that. But it really it's how high you're going. And if you think about it, every centimeter you go in height is energy you're spending going up rather than energy you're spending going forward.
Hmm.
Right. And so once again, there's there's kind of an optimal level here, but there is a balance between ground contact time, vertical oscillation, and cadence that all played together. So
they're all
interrelated.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're all
You can't change one
yeah.
without changing others.
Yeah.
So
And so
go
you
ahead.
can run. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, go ahead and take it from there.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say you can run in place.
Yep.
And you can have a high stride frequency. You can manipulate ground contact time even in running in place. I mean, do a slow cadence, high, whatever. And then your vertical oscillation can actually be controlled, but you're not moving forward at all. And, the extreme example. And so these are all intertwined, and they're sometimes hard to know when we ask about one parameter, what's happening, because there's other things that come into play. Ground contact time by itself doesn't tell us how fast we're running, doesn't tell us how high we're going up and down, but it's one component of that equation to ultimately determine that.
So do you want to answer his question?
Well, yeah. So now, what is there an optimum balance between ground contact time and vertical oscillation? This is that's a great question, and it has to come. What has to come back into play here is how fast you're running at the same time. We actually did an experiment. I think I've mentioned it a couple times because it was such a simple experiment, but yet I think impactful. And I need to go back and do some more work where someone had people run on the treadmill watching TV or not watching TV. And in essence, I'll cut to the chase on this one. In essence, roughly half the group liked watching TV while running, and the other half did not like watching TV while running. And to this day, I've got to go back and redo that experiment and do this measure of vertical oscillation, because my sense is the people who didn't like watching TV probably had greater vertical oscillation and more disruption to their visual stability, and they didn't like that. Whereas others had a gait where, and again, total hypothesis, but it makes sense, that their vertical oscillation was such that their gait was much more stable, and they're watching a TV program really didn't bother them at all.
Yeah, and the other one, I don't know if you've seen the research on this one. It's like how far the TV is away.
Yeah, right.
It's the same, because if your TV is close, the more vertical oscillation you have, it basically makes you sick.
Yeah.
Right. So no, I think that's a good one to
right.
look at.
Now let me throw in Johnny's question, because this is a great question. John's question is, are the current wearable devices accurate compared to what is used in the lab?
Okay, so
all right.
Again, this is really interesting stuff. If you wear this, if you get it just off of a watch, it's not as good. Mm-hmm. If you have a chest strap with your watch that can do these metrics, so the one that I use is the Garmin HRM Pro, and the research that I saw on it, but this is obviously just from Garmin, is I think it's 97, 98%.
No.
So it's not as good, but I'll also tell you that at UNLV, we have, what is it, an $80,000 instrumented treadmill?
Yeah, yeah, right.
That doesn't work very well,
That's true. It doesn't. But
right?
it works well for within the limitations of what it was built for.
Right, but
It
it doesn't
doesn't
work well
work
for
well for
this,
the types of things that we're interested in.
right? So the watch is probably better than this $80,000 treadmill.
Mhm.
Now, if, and correct me if I'm wrong, if we did running over a force platform, like a Kessler force
Mhm.
platform, like we have that are very expensive force platforms,
Yeah.
those are probably way better,
Hmm.
but you only get one stride or maybe two strides.
Yeah, one contact, right?
Right. So for taking it on the run, there's probably nothing better. And
Yeah.
at least that I know of. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so this I like how you're summarizing it. If you came into the lab and we were going to get some of these measurements, you'd have to run over a force platform or maybe two that we have. Each one of those costs roughly $20,000. Okay, it's like a glorified bathroom scale, and you'd have to run within a certain space that we have 3D motion capture set up. That 3D motion capture system is $250,000.
Yeah.
All right. And if we want to go to energetic cost, now we have to tie in another system that measures the physiology, not only heart rate, but also how much air you're moving in. And that system runs about 60,000. Okay. So we're talking about lots of, high quality data that we use for research purposes. These wearable tech devices are approaching that ability, and they can do something more, is that they can extend the lab outside. The vast majority of our running related research is done in a laboratory in controlled settings, either on a treadmill or in a very short run. Our lab is maybe 15 meters long, whereas a lot of our running outside can be quite different. And so these wearable technology, they are approaching that level of accuracy, but that what they also allow us to do is to measure things in the real world, which opens up a whole nother layer of questions.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so, and the other thing that I always had an issue with even in the lab was, and this is nothing against the research, because research we have to control so many parameters.
Yeah.
But your running after 10 miles looks completely different than you come in the lab and we warm you up on the treadmill for 10 minutes
Mhm.
and then have you run across the force platform.
We've done research on that.
I know we have, right? But it's different.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and probably different to the error rate that the watch would have,
yeah,
or close to.
yeah.
And then for triathletes in particular, the one that I would love to see, and probably it exists, and I don't know, it's that back half of an Ironman marathon,
Hmm.
right? Well, we can't take a lab, like we can't take somebody off the course, right?
Hmm.
And say, hey, come run on our treadmill. Or it would not be practical to say, hey, what I want you to do is swim for an hour, then bike for 5 hours at 75% of your lactic threshold, then run for a half marathon, and then come into our lab and
Right.
we're gonna look at your run metrics. But a watch can do this.
I love where you're going, and it's so important to have all different types of research to be able to get at understanding running. You need lab work where you control a lot of things, environment, grade, what have you, even visual cues. That needs to happen. But the field work becomes very important. And I think this is where we are going to make some big leaps in understanding running, is because of the wearable technology. But not only that, but because of the data processing steps in terms of AI and machine learning, that's going to allow us to manage those data sets. Because you go out and you go for a 10-mile run, that's a lot of data to process.
Yep.
A lot of our research is very, zeroed in on a very short period of time. And this is what you're speaking to. But trying to understand what happens during the course of a marathon, that takes some really sophisticated processing to really get to that point. I mean, we've done things like, variability of pace over a marathon and things like that. But really, I think that the processing algorithms are getting much more sophisticated, that we're going to learn more. So, John, the answer to your question is they are different, but the wearable devices are actually, I think, really going to extend out our knowledge of running in probably a short period of time.
Yeah. No, I think it's good. So let's give them kind of the blanket numbers here. So
Okay.
it is measured in centimeters. There's no in the research, there's no optimal number, once again, but for most recreational competitive runners, we're looking at between 6 and 10 centimeters is kind of where you want to be. And that doesn't mean 8 is optimal, right? It means, for me, if you're outside of, and most of the people that I've seen, they're above 10. I had a runner I worked with last year, and he was at 13. And once we've figured that out and we gave him some exercises and got him down to like 9, he was a really tall runner. Got him down to 9. He got so much more efficient. He became so much more efficient. And just a few exercises and a few key words that he utilized when he was running really helped him. One of the things that helped him was to focus on the horizon.
To do what?
To focus on the horizon.
Oh yeah,
when he was running, because he was always looking down at the ground in front of him. Right. And really, what you should do, don't get me wrong, like you want to make sure you're stepping well, but when you're on a nice flat bike path or road or whatever, and there's nothing in your way, if you just focused on the horizon, making sure the horizon didn't bounce.
Yeah, right.
That was his key, along with a few exercises we had him do. And the exercises that we had him do, there was 2, had him do some hill sprinting. I love that. This was off of the Jack Daniels book. I can't remember the name of it, but it was one of the things that emphasized where he was really going hard to run uphill hard, and they were like short, like 10 to 20 second sprints uphill. The other one that I really like for this one is, and I think he did it like once a week, was some barefoot running at the end of his run, and it wasn't long. It was like 200-300 meters on grass or on turf. And it just really helped him kind of find that kind of a little less spring in his step, because the shoe was giving him a little bit of spring, and he could feel a little bit better. And this, along with other things he was doing, like we talked about before with the plyometrics, which also helps with vertical oscillation. That's kind of how we incorporated it.
I love that, because it again speaks to this idea, giving the brain different ways to run uphill, run downhill. You change the way you run on each of those. You run differently on grass than you do on road. You run differently when you're in bare feet versus in shoes, sometimes subtly different. And sometimes that subtleness is really important for the brain to then incorporate in its AI. Well, it's not AI at that point, but to incorporate in our internal algorithms in terms of what's the best way to run. And so by exposing yourself to all these different ways to run forward, sideways, on running barefoot in grass, on turf, these are all great ideas in terms of trying to understand not only vertical oscillation, but just running gait in general.
Yeah, agreed. Okay. Any other questions on vertical oscillation? And did we answer all of Bob's?
No, but I think probably one more detail on vertical oscillation. It's going to be influenced by how low you're going to be in your gait cycle and how high you're going to be in your gait cycle. That low point is going to happen around mid stance. And if you're really what we would call a compliant runner, you have a lower extremity where you do a lot of knee flexion, you can actually dip low, and maybe it's too low. And then when you propel yourself off into the air for the other foot to strike the ground, you're going to go up you're basically a projectile, and you're going to go so high. And so that time that you're in the air with neither foot in contact with the ground ends up defining that high point as well.
Yeah, you're right.
And so I think the drills that you're speaking to could be influencing either the low point or the high point, and bringing one of those or both of them sort of closer together. I think it's really a great way.
Well, I think the plyometric in particular really helps with the low point, right? Because exactly, you're creating a stiffer, potentially a stiffer leg, which is not going to collapse as much potentially. And once again, looking at somebody's video, if they have a video, and looking at them running on a video and seeing if they have this and they have a high vertical oscillation, where is it happening? Is it happening on the high end or the low end? And really, if you think about the high end, where is it happening from? Right. It would tend to, in my experience, tend to happen with a lot of calf push off in the vertical in a vertical plane. When we really, and you look at, once again, this goes back to Jack Daniels' book, which I read a long time ago. was really trying to turn your calf off in that last little phase
Mm-hmm.
and let momentum and the forward lean take you rather than a big push off of your calf.
All right. I've got some bad news, Ted.
What's that?
We are already at 55
I
minutes.
know we're only going to talk about, well, really, I really wanted just to get to cadence.
Okay.
So then we don't really have to talk about running power tonight. We could, what we should do is find somebody that's an expert in running power. And because I'm not an expert in it, but maybe we can have a guest talk about running power. But let's talk about cadence, because, and we've talked about cadence when we did my running analysis with Ron Gallagher. And cadence is a thing that I think a lot of people that think they understand. It's easy, especially for a triathlete, to understand cadence, because we talk about cadence in cycling, we talk about stroke rate in swimming. And so cadence, I think it's pretty easy to understand. Really, it's, it's your steps per minute, and it counts right and left. At least in Garmin, it counts right and left. When we do cadence in biomechanics and true biomechanics, do we measure just 1 foot, or we measure both?
Yeah, we will typically stay with stride frequency, which is one side, but there's plenty of literature on step frequency, which is both sides. And it's obviously one half, and
and why I said that is because if you're reading articles in this area, you have to know.
It's very confusing.
Yeah, because if someone's like, oh yeah, their stride is 90, that's a step frequency
and there's
180.
plenty of literature where they'll say stride frequency, but they mean step frequency, or vice versa. And I'll throw one more out there. You can actually, you'll actually see literature where they talk about stride length and step length as the distance that you travel while your foot's in contact with the ground. So just throwing out one more sort of odd piece there. But
what I've told my students when I teach this stuff is, if you're reading literature and it's 2 digits, it's 1 leg. If it's 3 digits, it's 2 legs. It's as simple as that. Don't get caught up in it. Okay. So John, why is cadence in running so, in my opinion, I think it's important. Do you feel it's important, and if so, why?
Oh, it is, because it's one of the basic kinematic descriptors we use to describe gait. We use stride frequency, stride length, and the product of those two tells you how fast you're going to go. So stride length and stride frequency are intertwined with each other, but that third piece of velocity ends up being really important, because there's 3 variables there, and you can manipulate them, independent of each other, but then obviously they influence the other. So it's really, so it's a basic kinematic descriptor of running style.
Okay, good. So when I look at it in, because I'm not a biomechanist, I'm a clinician. I look at it as, in general, higher cadence are better. You tend to be a little bit more of an efficient runner, and it will, to a certain extent, depending on how high you go, will reduce the impact on joints. Now, I'm gonna put a little caveat in there, and because this is some tricky stuff, it can reduce impact on some joints and then increase it on others. And this is tricky stuff, right? Because this is all interrelated. So I was reading an article that was talking about it. It was saying that it would decrease the impact potentially in the knee, but maybe increase it in the ankle.
Yeah.
And understanding that is important. When you're messing with a system, it's not, you very rarely have win-win.
Yeah.
So,
well, we've done a lot of work in this area where we've manipulated stride frequency, stride length, and velocity, and looked at some impact. And this is going back to what we said before. There's going to be an optimal range of stride frequencies that you can operate in. It's not maximal, nor is it the lowest. In fact, if you go to those extreme ends of trying to use too fast of a stride frequency or too low of a stride frequency, it's going to be much worse in lots of different ways. So you got to find that region where stride frequencies end up being the best for the given velocity you're trying to maintain.
Cosmo's putting on a little show for us.
Yeah, I see him. Hey, Cosmo. Yeah, I got this beast came up here on my lap.
Oh, yay. So when we talk about this, we talked with Ron Gallagher about this. Sorry, Cosmo. Well, he does it every night, by the way. He does this little show every night. We talked to Ron Gallagher about this. He made very specific mention about cadence, and I'm going to agree with what he said, and this is what I've read in the literature as far as running injuries, is that in general lower cadences are somewhat predictive of injury.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, there is an optimal number for everyone, but there's this range, and the magic range tends to be between, when you look at the literature and you look at the experts in the area, 170 to 190 steps per minute.
Mm-hmm.
And with the taller you are, it tends to be on the lower range. Is that what you've come across?
It's actually really a very puzzling parameter, and it's not always well correlated with height even. It's really it's a funny thing.
Okay.
But and to the point of lower stride frequencies, which will equate then to a longer stride length, we've actually done a lot of research that the longer your stride length is, the greater the impact.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where you're sort of zeroing in on, is that impact can be a causative factor for injury. What's interesting though is that if you look over a given distance, a longer stride length will reduce the number of impacts you have, but
Yeah.
they're going to be greater. So yeah, it's
Well, and if you think about it, and we haven't really talked much about this, but if you just think of like when you land, what happens? And let's just talk about the quadricep muscle,
mhm,
right? When you land in running, your quadricep muscle is going to contract, right?
mhm,
It contracts to absorb some of that energy.
mhm.
If it's got to absorb a little bit less energy every step, you're going to be less, by the end, I'm hoping you're going to be less fatigued. But to your point, if you take less steps,
Mhm.
maybe you wouldn't be.
So we're going to go long now. If you get me going in this direction, I love
I
this.
don't, I
I
know
did
you
my
love this stuff.
I
And
did
that's
my
why,
dissertation on fatigue, and what's
okay.
interesting is when you fatigue someone, what some responses are is to take a longer stride,
I know.
which makes no sense because that seems to be harder. And I'm seeing Bob's commented on you use more strength when you run a low cadence. I got to be careful here because strength within the stride, it's a very different way of thinking about things, because these strides, they're strength is a funny parameter that sometimes means, oh, I'm not going to go down this path. It's really
Be
it's a
careful.
but when we start looking in at fatigue and how someone responds to fatigue, sometimes they respond in a way that almost seems like it puts more stress on the muscle. And I think that's Bob's point right there, is that you are stressing the muscle more, that you're stressing the active part of the muscle tendon more
Yep.
when you run with a slower stride. And if you want to use strength to describe that, I'll be fine with that. But if you run with a shorter stride and a higher stride frequency, you can actually use some of the elastic material a little better, which is not it's not requiring a metabolic process to help propel yourself forward. So,
But once again, only to a certain point, right?
yes, oh, totally. Yeah, we're talking, you
There's
got to
break
find
points
out.
there's
Yeah,
break points on both sides. And then
yeah.
the other thing I'd add, I think you're absolutely right. And then your dissertation obviously was right.
Mhm.
When you have a lower stride frequency and a longer stride, there'll be less central fatigue,
Mm,
right? Because
mhm.
it's the same in cycling. The lower stride or the lower cadence, um, we're going to have a higher heart rate.
We did that experiment.
Or no, a lower heart, we'll have a lower heart rate. You did
Yeah,
that experiment. So and it's true, right? And if you have a longer stride length, you have a lower heart rate.
yeah.
Am I
Um,
right?
no.
Oh no.
No. If you if you run with a cadence and a stride length that you self-select, if you change that stride frequency or stride length, it almost always go now. But we're talking big changes, plus or
Right.
minus 10% change in stride. I mean, that's a big change. Most of the changes that we typically want to operate in are closer to plus or minus 5%, maybe
Right.
2%. And in that small range, we actually won't see these statistical differences in either heart rate or stride frequency. That's why I always say we've got a little less slop in the system.
Yeah.
But the experiment that I did for my dissertation is exactly what you're actually asking about, where I had people run non-fatigued and I put them on an exercise machine to fatigue just the quadriceps. So they did repeated bouts of knee extension exercise to the point that they couldn't do them anymore. And then we did it again. And then I had them get back on the treadmill and run
Oh,
again.
they hated you.
Oh, they did. And one, yeah, I can tell some stories on that one. But yeah, but what was interesting is they almost always picked the same stride rate that they were running with before. But when we fatigued them centrally by having them go to their max effort and a great exercise test, then run again, then they changed their stride rate. So it's a very different mechanism if you fatigue a specific muscle versus the system. Oh, now we're going to go long.
Well, that's okay. So we can, I think that was a really good way to put it. But I think if we wrap around this, once again, if you're outside of kind of those normal ranges
Hmm.
and you're having issues, it might be something to look at, right?
Yeah.
So once again, if you're a 160 runner, you're running at
Hmm.
160, I would contend that you should probably increase your stride frequency.
Yeah.
If you're a 190 and you're having issues, this probably isn't your problem,
Yeah.
or you're 180, you're right in kind of in that middle of the bell curve. This is not something you probably want to mess with. But I just think if you're, in my experience, if you're abnormally low, it's something to look at. And then obviously, then looking at the stride length, because they're obviously, like you said, they're completely associated.
Hmm.
And when we had Ron on, he gave us his kind of magic words he was giving people to increase their stride frequency or their cadence. And it was just try and run just a little, try and move your feet just a little bit faster.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Was all it was. And we don't want big changes, right? If someone's
Yeah.
at 160, I don't say, hey, let's get you to 180 like next week.
Hmm.
It's okay, let's move just a little bit faster, and then
Yeah.
we'll look at your data. And if you're at 166 in a couple of
Hmm.
weeks, like, okay, good. Let's
Yeah.
hold that for a while.
Yeah.
Let's keep that happy. And do your issues go away? Whatever those issues are. If not, let's go a little bit faster, but do it slowly.
Hmm.
I want to kind of think of all of these things, John. If we're going to mess with these things, they should be done very slowly.
Yeah. Very slowly. And I think you're right that most people would benefit by taking a faster stride rate. Not a huge amount, maybe 2% faster, maybe 4%, maybe 5%. When we start trying to change beyond 5%, there's going to be some there's going to be a price to pay somewhere. So you got to be really careful, and these have to be really really subtle changes. And even at you're speaking about end of a marathon, even then, that's probably better to think faster stride frequency
Yeah.
versus slow stride frequency. Again, just as a
Or
sort of a
yeah,
pragmatic take-home message.
or oh, I'm tired. I'm gonna take long strides.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
But that being said, I don't think you want to get in a position where you're starting to get tired. Like, okay, I want to increase it a lot,
yeah. Right. No, no.
right? Because
Mhm.
once again, you fall out of that 2 or 3% range, and then
Yeah,
your efficiency goes
yeah.
down. Now, what about the situation, John? And this is the last question I'll ask you. I promise all this stuff because this is fascinating. As I run, let's say, especially in a triathlon, I've noticed that as I run throughout the run, my cadence goes down as I become more fatigued, especially I'm looking at mile 10, 11, 12.
Yeah.
At that point, I actually try and focus on that. Do you
Hmm.
think that's a good, like, that goes along with the same thing we were just talking about?
So say that again. When you run in a triathlon, what happens to cadence?
So at like mile 10 or so, my cadence starts to go down,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I'm fatigued, like I'm
Yeah.
tired, I'm sore.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, 5K to the finish.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, I just kind of focus, like, I put a focus on cadence.
Yeah.
And I try, actually, believe it or not, I try not to think about any other things with my technique. When I'm running and when I'm racing, I usually don't think about technique at all.
Right.
But at that point, I know that last 5K for me, like that's an area I need to work on.
Yeah.
Do you think that's pretty typical? And
I do, and I think that's smart to think cadence at that point more so than almost anything, because once you get into that rhythm, hopefully you can maintain the pace. Obviously, the stride length is that other part of it,
yeah,
but as we're talking about, and I'm glad Bob brought this up, if you're going to slow cadence down, you most likely will be putting more stress on your muscles, more so than the elastic tissue as part of that muscle tendon area. So yeah, I think especially in that last section of a race, you want to try to have a way to deal with fatigue, and a faster cadence is probably good.
Yeah.
Or you may think it's faster, but it
But
may actually be where you were to begin with.
and that's the whole point, right?
Yeah,
Is probably is
yeah,
exactly where I was at
yeah,
the first
yeah.
kilometer,
That's
but
right.
I'm consciously thinking of it.
Yeah.
And once again with this one, some exercises. I still like jumping rope for cadence. I think it
Hmm.
goes hand in hand with ground contact
Jump
time.
rope in the water.
Yeah, and jump rope in the water, box jumps. The other one is that I want to see this. I keep giving credit to the Jack Daniels book. It was the forward lean
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
while you're running.
yep,
Forward lean from your ankles.
yep,
I think that's another one that can help with cadence. So,
yeah,
wow, John,
yeah.
we
One of my doc students, Josh, actually looked at forward lean. So, and
okay, good.
yeah,
Well,
it's a tough parameter to really pick up on, and a lot of people mean something different. Oh, this is so good.
I know, I know. What a great talk tonight.
Yeah,
Okay, so that's it for tonight. We did a ton. Next week we're going to talk about bike safety,
yep,
and we'll break down how you can be a little bit hopefully safer on
yep.
your
And
bicycle.
we'll come back to run metrics,
We
because this
will,
is this
we
is
will,
just
and we'll come back to run
because
metrics with
we're
more
we
stuff
really are
on
only
power.
scratching the surface. So
Yeah. Well, we don't want to give them the full master's course. They need to take
that's right.
the biomechanics of endurance sports at
That's
UNLV
right.
with John.
Hey, almost all my lectures are on YouTube, so
There you go. You can watch all of those lectures. But this was great. I learned a lot.
yeah.
I hope everyone else did as well. And thank you so much for coming on a Sunday night.
Yep, and thanks Bob and John for the questions on the live stream. Really appreciate that. That helps.
All right.
All right, have a good evening.
Yep. You too. Bye bye, everybody.